Good afternoon. Welcome to our lecture program. I am Kostas Zanos, Vice President and Chair of the Program Committee of Hellenic Lake Midwest. First, I would like to announce our next lecture, which will be held on Sunday, January 22, 2023 at 3 p.m. Chicago time. We will present Eddie Zemenidis, Executive Director of the Hellenic American Leadership Council, in a lecture on the US-Greece relations in view of the war in Ukraine, the extremely provocative and aggressive stance of Erdogan's Turkey against Greece and Cyprus, and the growing alignment of Erdogan's Turkey with Putin's Russia. Most likely, this lecture will be our first live or hybrid lecture after the easing of the COVID pandemic. Our speaker this afternoon is Dr. Alexander Kitroeff, Professor Emeritus of History at Haverford College in Pennsylvania, who joined us from Athens, Greece. Professor Kitroeff holds a PhD degree in modern history from Oxford University. He has authored the books The Greeks in Egypt, 1919 to 1937, Ethnicity and Class. Griegos in America, The Greeks in the Americas, Wrestling with the Ancients, Modern Greek Identity and the Olympics, Hellas, Europe Παναθηναϊκός, 100 χρόνια ελληνική ιστορία, The Greeks and the Making of Modern Egypt, and the Greek Orthodox Church in America, A Modern History. He has collaborated with the film director Maria Iliou as historical advisor in several documentaries, including The Journey, The Greek Dream in America, Smyrna 1922, The Destruction of a Cosmopolitan City, and Athens Between East and West, 1821 to 1896, a 5-part series where the first part premiered in February 2020 at the Benaki Museum in Athens. We will close the lecture with a questions and answer session. You can type your questions at any time by clicking on the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. This will open another screen on the right where you can type your questions. Those who attend the event on Facebook can type their questions on the comments box on the left or at the bottom of the screen. Professor Kitroeff, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Costa, for this introduction.
Please unmute yourself. We cannot hear. Unmute yourself. Okay, you're fine now.
I'm fine, yes.
Yes, okay.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation. And thank you very much for asking me to talk about this topic, which is very timely. This is the Greeks in the Black Sea, especially the northern rim of the Black Sea, is a very timely issue here because it is one of the historic Greek diasporas. It has suffered during the war between Russia and Ukraine. Many of them have left and come to Greece as refugees, and we hope they go back. For many Greek people, this was news. They weren't aware of the existence of the Greeks in the Black Sea. What I want to do today is take you through the history of the Greek presence in the Black Sea from the beginning right through to the present. Let me start with this map that shows the ancient Greek communities in the Black Sea, the Euxine Sea, as the ancients called it. And as many people know, it was the ancient Greeks who settled this area, and there was a continuous Greek presence around the Black Sea that continued through to the Byzantine era. Now, from the time when the Byzantine Empire collapsed in the 1500s, until Russia took over this area from the Ottomans in the 1700s. Some people have said that there was still a continuous Greek presence. Other people have questioned it. Maybe maybe there were Greeks continuously along the northern coast of the Black Sea. We know for certain they were in the Pontus region. The northern part of the Black Sea that is my topic today, I think the issue is complicated. We shouldn't insist on that. It's historically, it's a Greek area. Whether there was a continuous Greek presence from the ancient times right to the present or not is not that important in my mind. I'm looking at the modern period, and this is the period in which the northern rim of the Black Sea is taken by the Russians. They pushed the Ottomans out of this area, which was underdeveloped when the Ottomans controlled it. And Catherine the Great extends the Russian Empire southwards. It's a little bit like the Americans were going westwards, the Russians were going southwards, and Catherine the Great takes over those lands and establishes the town of Odessa, or Vissos in Greek, in 1794 on the site of an Ottoman fortress town of Hadzibey. And Catherine the Great invited people from Europe, migrants, to come and settle in that area to help the Russians colonize that area of the Black Sea. There were many of the people who arrived were Greeks, not all of them, but the Greeks were a very significant presence of the colonizers in the northern rim of the Black Sea. And there were two categories of Greeks: merchants and seafarers, who established themselves in three important urban centers, many of which we've been hearing about in the news because they're involved in the war between the Ukraine and Russia. They settled in Odessa, Mariupol, and Taganrog, in Greek, Odyssos, Mariupoli, and Taiganion or Taigani. There were also very many farmers, workers who settled in the rural areas, especially around Mariupol. There was a large number of villages inhabited by Greek agricultural workers and farmers. And the merchants and seafarers came from all over the Greek world, but the largest number, and especially the farmers and agricultural workers and artisans, came from the Pontus region, and as we will also see, the Caucasus. They were fleeing Ottoman oppression and accepting Catherine's invitation to settle in the newly conquered southern lands. This presentation this evening is, I've divided it into 4 parts. I'm going to look at the settlements in Odessa, Mariupol, and Taganrog, the Greek settlements, look at what happened in the 19th century, then go to the 20th century when the troubles start for the Greeks, especially with the Russian Revolution. Although the Greek presence survives the Russian Revolution, it still exists. And then look at the situation that we have at present. I have some maps just to remind you. The Black Sea, the town of Odessa is what we were talking about. Mariupol is up here on the right, and we'll see Taganrog is just further to the east. We'll have a look at Taganrog closer. Greek lands, Black Sea, a great deal of Greek settlement up in southern Russia. Let me also point out the town of Batumi in Georgia, where a lot of people from the Pontus region are going to settle, fleeing the Ottomans. And of course, we've got a Greek presence also on this side of the Black Sea. But our topic this evening is Odessa, Mariupol, and Taganrog. This is a map that shows you the exponential growth that Odessa experiences in the from its settlement. Well, in its settlement of 1794, it's nothing. It's a fortress here. This is the Hadzi Bey fortress. It's nothing. Very few structures, as you can see, in 1794. And then 1814, this is the map of Odessa in 1914. You see that within a very short time, 20 years, we have a distinguishable, quite sophisticated looking city. And I am particularly fond of this map on the right of 1814 in Odessa, because obviously that there are many Greeks already settled there, but most important, as I think we all know because we discussed it so much during the centennial celebrations of 1821, this was where the Filiki Eteria was established by Greek merchants in 1814. So this map that we're looking at on the right, in a sense, we can use our historical imagination and think of in one of these little squares, in one of these little buildings is where the Greeks gathered to form the Filiki Eteria that paved the way for the revolution of 1821. Going away from Odessa, which is here on the left, here's Mariupol, and here you can see more clearly Taganrog, which is in southern Russia. This is the border here. This is southern Russia, the commercial port of Taganrog. The Greeks who went to Mariupol especially were led by a prelate at the time, Metropolitan Ignatios Kozadinos, who was the metropolitan who helped the Greeks move from the Crimea. The Crimea was then a very unstable area under the control of the Tatars and then the Ottomans, and the Greeks were very glad to get out of the Crimea, led by the metropolitan, and they settled in Mariupol. And these are exactly the people who settled in Mariupol and in the villages around Mariupol and prospered there. This is a spectacular photograph of a very impressive building, which is the Greek community building, which has a statue of Ignatios outside, and it shows you the way in which the community was able to establish a presence in this town of Mariupol. And Catherine the Great is very appreciative of the help that the Greeks are offering the Russians at the time, and she issues this certificate of appreciation of Greek Christians. It's on the left, it's in Russian. On the right, you'll see, you will be able to distinguish that is in Greek, and she is praising and thanking the Greeks for helping establish Mariupol and, of course, the other towns in southern Russia. These towns were very important because the Black Sea, of course, was the seaway through which the Russians were exporting their grain to the rest of Europe and to Western Europe. So the ships left the ports. This is the port of Mariupol. The ships left laden, especially with wheat, which was the main product, made their way down through the Black Sea, through the Dardanelles, down through the Aegean and off into the Western European ports, and brought back goods from Western Europe. So all these three towns were very important commercial centers. And yes, it's a reminder of Smyrna. Smyrna played exactly that role for the mainland of Asia Minor. So again, we have Greeks established in key places where export and import is taking place, and they are facilitating this and helping the development of those areas. Here is the map again to show you, just to remind you, this is the Azov Sea, and this is even a closer look of Taganrog. We hear a lot of Rostov-on-Don, mostly now in history, but Taigani or Taganrog was very important at the time. This is a map of Taganrog. Again, it looks as if the town is almost built to become a port. It's kind of almost got a natural kind of physical structure which enables maritime trade there. And there were many Greeks who settled there. These were merchants who settled there in Taganrog. They were wealthy. This is the Greek street of Taganrog. Both Odessa and Taganrog, Taiganio, had such an important and wealthy Greek presence that streets, I'm looking at this postcard here, this is not a street, this looks like a main avenue of the city is named Greek, which is a reminder of the significant presence of the Greeks there. And of course, the wealth made out of trading meant that the Greeks could build magnificent mansions. This is a splendid photograph of this mansion of the Alferakis family. They were one of the commercial trading Greek families. You see these magnificent 4 Corinthian style columns right at the front part of the building, and the rest of the decorations are very elaborate. And this is not the only. There were several other such buildings that the Greeks inhabited. So moving on to part 2, let's look at what's happening in the 19th century. There was a very felicitous and easy settlement, and the Greeks were beginning to prosper. And because they were so prosperous, it's not surprising that in some ways we know the diaspora played a very important role in preparing the revolution. It's not surprising that the Filiki Eteria is established in Odessa. It's established in Odessa. It's a secret society, as we know, but the assumption is that the Russians, as fellow Orthodox, are going to be sympathetic to the Greek cause. And that's one of the reasons it's established in Odessa by the Greek merchants. Aside from the establishment of the Filiki Eteria, the Filiki Eteria is established in Odessa, and then, of course, it spreads down through the Balkans into Greece. And the Greeks that remain in Odessa are wealthy merchants. There are 2 types of Greek merchants in Odessa. This is, again, very typical of the Greek diaspora. The one category are the people who are settled in Odessa. They are the families who've come, they've settled in Odessa, and they're engaged in the import-export trade of the city. But we also have the even wealthier families who have got a presence throughout the Mediterranean. The Raleigh brothers, who have got a presence in London, Marseille, other ports of the Mediterranean. The Rodokanakis and Salvagos are also present in Marseille, and the Salvagos are based in Alexandria. So we've got 2 types of merchants, the Odessa merchants and the Greek merchants who are part of the bigger diaspora networks throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. And quite significant to note is that almost just 3 years after the establishment of the Filiki Eteria, the merchants there established the Helleno-Commercial School, Ελληνοεμπορική Σχολή, in 1817. This is very typical because it shows you the orientation is business and commerce. So the school combines both Greek education with commercial training. And on the right, you see several of the community and school buildings that belonged to the Greek community of Odessa. Looking at those Greek merchant houses with branches in Odessa, this is, it's not very clear, but this is the Rodokanaki family. interesting. I've just picked one member, Ifigenia Rodokanaki. She is born in Odessa. The family's established a branch in Odessa. She's born there in 1834, but because the family is moving around the Eastern Mediterranean, her death occurs in Marseille in 1895. And this is a letter written from one Rodokanaki to another Rodokanaki. This here is Odessa. I know it doesn't look very clear, but it's the address is, it's a letter in Odessa, and it's addressed to one of the Rodokanaki family in Malta. So we have the networks working here, very important. And that shows you, if the Rodokanaki family and the Salvago family are bothering to be established in Odessa, that means that the commerce there is very significant. Turning now to the Odessa-based merchants, this is a long text. I won't read the whole of it, but this is an article by a historian of Russia, Patricia Herlihy, who's written books on Odessa, and she gives us the names of the 10 richest Greek merchants of Odessa in 1817. Serafino, Mavros, Inglesi, Koubaris, Yiannopoulos, Marazlis, Papachadzis, Manesis, Ambrosiou, Paleologos. And a contemporary estimated the value of their combined fortunes at 10 million rubles without even knowing the exchange rate. It's obviously a very impressive figure. And the interesting thing that is said, in the middle of the text, we get the information that in 1820, Alexandros Ypsilantis, the Greek patriot who organized the first phase of the revolt, went through Odessa. And further down, again, important, and we're going to dwell on this in a minute, she tells us the wealthy Greeks were not, aside from helping the Greek cause, the wealthy Greeks were not without a sense of loyalty to their adopted city, Odessa. During the Napoleonic Wars, the Duc de Richelieu appealed to the Greeks of Odessa to support the Russian war effort, and they helped the Russian war effort, and they helped the city of Odessa. This is, again, very recognizable to any of you who've read the history of the Greek diaspora. The Greeks are... it's very clear the Greeks have strong ties to Greece, but they adapt, they assimilate, or they become part of the local environment half the time in order to protect themselves and contribute to the local society as well as contributing to the Greeks. It should be said, and this is not that well known, that the local Russians, having invited the foreigners to Odessa to help start the city and start commerce, eventually start envying the wealth of the Greeks, the Italians, other Europeans, and Jews, and they worry that there'll be no Russian entrepreneurial class arising and taking over if the foreigners stayed there with privileges. So they pressure the foreigners to acquire Russian citizenship. There's a great deal of assimilation, and many of them change their Greek names to Russian ones. Avierinos becomes Averov. The famous Averov family was originally Avierinos, and my own family from my father's side that I know was from Chios and Egypt had a connection with Odessa as well, and we haven't researched this enough, but we believe they were called Kitroeff, left Chios and became Kitroeff, then went back to Chios and then to Egypt. Despite this Russification, these pressures to assimilate, and the Greeks in the United States had faced pressures to assimilate from the 1920s to the 1950s, at least. The Greek merchants continue to the wheat exporting business. It's Russia's defeat in the Crimean Wars of 1850, a big turning point for Russia. You know, Russia's defeated. They have a big, they have a kind of moment of reflection. Oh dear, you know, what are we doing wrong? This is when serfdom is abolished. And by that time, the American wheat has started to reach Europe, and then Russia lose some of its markets. There's new technology and railroad and transport communication, and the Russians really help their own merchants to establish themselves. They favor them with the technological and railroad transport, and that's when the Greek merchant companies, especially the Rodokanaki Salvagos, the big ones, they closed down their branches in Odessa, never to return. Greek merchants, the indigenous Greek merchants of Odessa remain. The best example is Grigoris Maraslis, Grigori Marasli, who is one of the wealthiest person in the city. He's fully assimilated into the Russian elite. He was born in Odessa, 1831. His father was from Evia, his mother was from Constantinople. He becomes a Russian citizenship, and then he becomes mayor of Odessa. Mayor of Odessa from 1878 to 1894, and during his tenure, the city experienced an era of urban revival and modernization. The Maraslis, of course, also helped Greece. You know, we have in Kolonaki, we've got the Maraslio school as a reminder of the donations of the family to Greece as well. But we have a wonderful example of Greeks assimilating and doing well in Russia and helping Russia as well as Greece. The same contraction of the Greek merchant presence is experienced in Taganrog. These are wonderful photographs of the Sifneos family, who are from Mytilene. They are exporters of olive oil and other goods and wheat. They export olive oil from Mytilene to the Black Sea and export wheat down to the Mediterranean. This is a letter, Sifneo Frères, Sifneo brothers, and they've got two places where the firm is established, Constantinople and Taganrog. I hope you can see it here on the top left of the letter. This is a wedding that takes place in Taganrog. If you know, photographs are wonderful sources of information. They show us daily life. It looks like a splendid, wealthy wedding that confirms in many ways, not to mention the furniture. I mean, behind the people who are posing for the photographs, it really shows us the wealth that the Greeks had established in Taganrog as well. And we see here these gentlemen here who are the Sifneo family businessmen. All this is going to come to a close with World War I. World War I, of course, the sea routes in the Mediterranean are disrupted, and many of the Greek companies pull back and go back to Greece, waiting to see what's going to happen with the end of the World War I. So we have a contraction in Odessa, we have a contraction in Taganrog after a very splendid and prosperous 19th century, where we have a longer-term presence is in Mariupol, precisely because the Greeks there are agricultural workers, they're farmers, they're artisans, they're shopkeepers. So they're somewhat, they're unaffected by the bigger changes of commerce and trade and import and export. The remarkable thing about Mariupol is that the Greek language is preserved. These, of course, are Pontic Greeks who speak this particular language we call Romaica, and which is derived, Romaica is said to be derived from Pontic Greek and some Northern Greek dialects. And one village is said to speak Pontic Greek recognizable Pontic Greek. There are many varieties. There's another variety, Urum, from Romaica, Urum, which is more closer to Turkish, which is spoken by those who come from the Ottoman Empire. It's very interesting. You've got Greek dialects all around Mariupol, and eventually they're going to decide, okay, we can't have too many dialects going, we can't have too many varieties of schools, let's all agree that we're going to speak the Greek, the mainland Greek, the Athenian Greek, and that's when the schools get organized. But that's after the collapse of communism, when they're able to figure out their school policies. But it's a wonderful thing that these dialects survive in Mariupol, and there's cultural life that goes along with that preservation of the Greek language. It's really quite amazing. In a country that, as I was saying, was assimilating. The Russians were assimilators. They wanted the Greeks to assimilate, but and it's a wonderful sign of the tenacity of Greek identity that, especially in Mariupol, all these languages survived. As I said, the Greeks were waiting to see what would happen with World War I in terms of trade routes. No one was expecting something else to happen, which was, of course, the seismic, colossal change that Russia experienced politically. And we had it in two phases. We have the so-called the end of Tsarist Russia with the first revolution they have there in February under Kerensky. And as we know, it is followed by the October Revolution, which is the Bolsheviks. Kerensky are the moderates. And if actually the second revolution had not taken place, it is likely that Kerensky might have succeeded in producing a more democratic type of Russia, in which case the minorities, especially the Greeks, would have been able to prosper. Many of the commercial houses might have returned, and the history of the Greeks there might have been quite different. Nonetheless, from the time the Tsarist regime, which was very assimilationist, collapses in February, and Kerensky takes power, and there's an assumption that maybe Russia is becoming a democratic, more open, more pluralist country. In between that and the Russian Revolution that takes place in October, the Greeks get together, very optimistically, to figure out what they're going to do now that the circumstances have changed. Unfortunately, the circumstances were going to change for only even less than a year. But here we have a very big Greek conference of communities. If you look at the picture very closely, you see 4 clerics in the second row with their crosses, and the others are obviously community leaders and probably teachers and merchants. And this is the Greek Congress, the first and last, unfortunately, Greek Congress of Communities that takes place in Taganrog, Taiganio, in 1917. And for the record, their decisions are, you see the optimism and the potential that they had. They want to unify the communities. They want the church to become more autonomous from the Russian church. They want to reorganize the schools, establish a Greek bank there, have a Russian language newspaper. Very interesting. It seems that obviously the second and third generations were maybe losing a little bit of Greek. Who knows? We're not sure about that. They wanted to deal with agrarian issues. They were defining political stances. They were calling on Greece to establish consulates. They wanted to figure out what they were going to do with their philanthropic institutions. And finally, they were addressing the issue of mixed marriages. That might ring a bell or two for other diaspora communities. It's the same. There's an overall pattern to the existence of the Greek communities. Unfortunately, these plans were not going to come to fruition. But meanwhile, what we have is we've got the clashes with the Ottomans, and one of the things that this Congress does, aside from the decisions it takes about the future, it assigns Leonidas Iassonidis, a Pontian Greek, who went to Russia and went to the Caucasus. Iassonidis was responsible for coordinating the assistance, because what the southern Greeks of southern Russia were doing is they were receiving a new wave of refugees from the Pontus and other parts of the Ottoman Empire, who were fleeing repression. There was repression both in the Pontus region at the time, as well as the Caucasus regions, which were disputed between Russia and the Ottoman Empire. And it looked as if that moment in 1970, summer of 1917, that the Greek presence might have actually even grown bigger, and the Greek presence would have flourished. But as we know, history turned in a different direction. We have the Bolshevik Revolution of October 1917, and actually the Russian Revolution was not all bad news for the Greeks, despite the fact that obviously the Orthodox Church was suppressed. There were Sovietization policies. Everyone had to align themselves with the Soviet regime, but there were some autonomous regions created. The Greeks were given some autonomy in southern Ukraine, Donetsk and Mariupol, and they were allowed to keep their language, and as well as schools and publications. And that's when the Mariupol Greeks are starting to think about issues of language, etc. And we have information about newspapers and books. There are even theater performances. But there's another twist of history. Again, the southern Russia is not a very safe place to be at most moments in history. This is the repressions by Stalin. Stalin, who is by then in charge of the the Russian Empire, turns against the Greeks, the Jews, the Armenians, and other minorities. And there's a wave of repression in 1937-38, and there are huge deportations of Greeks from the Black Sea region. They're sent over to Central Asia because they're considered to be traitors of the regime. They'll eventually get back to that area only in 1956, after Stalin's death and after the Soviet Union turns back some of Stalin's policies. But so there's a return to the Mariupol area, and there's a gradual tolerance of the Greeks in this particular part of the world. But it's really the collapse of communism, 1989, collapse of the wall in Berlin. The Soviet communism will start unraveling in the early 1990s. It's only after those momentous changes and the establishment of independent Ukraine and a more democratic political system there that the minorities are really allowed to flourish. It's no surprise minorities can prosper really only under democratic circumstances and not dictatorial circumstances. This is the 2001 Ukrainian census, counting the population of 91,500 Greeks in the Ukraine, most of them around Donetsk. There are even 2,100 in Odessa, 2,800 in the Crimea. Read the Greek newspapers. The Greek journalists would sometimes talk about 150,000 Greeks. Maybe the Greek journalists know more than the Ukrainian census. There's a continuous exaggeration of the numbers. You know, when I hear that there are 3 million Greek Americans, anyway, don't let me start on that. 91,000, let's say 100,000, give or take with the errors. That's a significant presence. These people are third, fourth, fifth generation Greeks, and they're retaining their language and their identity. And that for me is extremely moving as I look at this photograph. And finally, to refer to the war, this is the president of the Greek community in Mariupolis, who was hiding during the worst part of the warfare during the clashes in that city, and was asking for Greece's intervention and help. As you know, Foreign Minister Vendias went to Greece. Many of the people were helped and escaped the war zones and were welcomed back in Greece. But the hope is, of course, that the Greeks will be able to return. If not, unfortunately, we will have lost an important historic diaspora with a very rich history, a very prosperous history, a huge contribution to the country that they had settled in, and above all, I think a very impressive retention of Greek identity. That is the slideshow, and I will stop sharing here, and thank you for your attention, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Kitroeff, for this very excellent lecture. We will proceed with the questions. Let me see here. What happened to the Q&A button, Stefanos?
I can see it myself. Do you want me to read the questions?
Okay, just a second. Okay. The first question is from Saradis Alexopoulos. What is the Greek language go-to book dealing with today's subject matter? What is the Greek language quotations go-to book dealing with today's subject matter?
Yes. I wish there was. I wish I had an answer to this. There are so many things that we don't have books about. So there's no go-to book, unfortunately, yet. So I can give you the American historian I mentioned, who has written about Odessa, and she has a history of Odessa, and articles on the Greeks, is Patricia Herlihy, Herlihy, Patricia Herlihy. There is a book on the Greeks of the Black Sea, of southern Russia, by Vasilis Kardasis. It's Lexington Press Books, probably out of print by now because Vasilis wrote it a long time ago. So those are just the two books on which refer to the Greeks in the Black Sea. Some of the information about the Greeks in Taganrog is in the work of Evridiki Sifneou, Sifnaiou. She's a descendant of the family, and she's written. But these are articles you will have. You'll have to search the search engines for articles. And there's also Mariana Koromila, a Greek author who'd written a kind of travelogue on the Greeks of the Black Sea. But those are off the top of my head, the names. And yes, we need a go-to book. I agree. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, the next question is from Costa de la Yorgas. I think it's the same question. He says, thank you, Professor Kitroeff. Are there any books or articles you can recommend on the topic of the Greeks of the Ukraine?
Yes.
I suppose from articles, you answer the books. I don't know about articles.
So you know what's happened now. If you read Greek and you Google, you just go, Ellinestis Mariupolis, you get a lot of articles, some of which they're from journalists, so they're not very extensive. There's some, I think what's happening now is some historians of the Pontus region, aware of the fact that the Greeks went to the Pontus, are trying to look at this history of the Greeks through, through the lens of Pontic history. So there may be some information there, but yes, no, basically the answer is the same as the first one. Those are the names, Herlihy, Kardasis, and Sifneo.
The next question is also from Kostas Dalagiorgas. Says, what are the views or the opinions of the Greeks of Greece about the Greeks of Ukraine? Why don't they want them to stay in Greece? I don't know if they don't or they do, but I suppose that's a question of Kostas.
Well, let's just to go a bit further back, the average Greek had no idea that there were Greeks in the Ukraine. So it was a big surprise to the Greeks that there were Greeks there. So then what happened was when the war started, the Greek television crews went to that area and started interviewing these people who were speaking in Greek, accented Greek, but they were speaking in Greek, and there was a very positive response from Greece and a positive welcome of the refugees here. I'll choose my words carefully. Not all refugees have been welcomed by mainland Greeks over the past 100 years or so. We know that. The welcome was extended to the Ukrainians. I think I think the official Greek position, there's no official Greek position, but what I think is happening is that if those people want to return to their businesses and their homes there, it would, and if the situation stabilizes, it would be a very important thing to have a Greek presence in that part of the world, not only because it's historic, but geopolitically it would help to have a presence in that part of the world. So it's not that they're not welcome in Greece, they are, but I think anyone who wants to return, that'll be facilitated.
Okay, the next question, which is a very long text by an anonymous attendee, which I don't know if it's relevant to the lecture. Do you have the chance to read it?
Is it in?
When the marionette of the Anglo-Americans and neocons,
Oh, okay.
Volodymyr Zelensky, beget virtually the Greek parliament for money and arms, he also presented a Greek member of Ukraine's premier military unit, the Azov Unit. The Azov Unit is a flat-out fascist outfit which incorporates two Nazi symbols and the so-and-so in its insignia. Is this insulting to the Greeks? Aren't also decades of American refusal to provide arms to Cyprus now altered as long as Cyprus functions as a conduit for arms to Ukraine? Finally, why is half a century of Turkish occupation of 1/3 of Cyprus of no importance whatsoever? So treat it as you think.
Okay, no, any question is welcome. I was aware of the furor over the Azov division, which has the type of people that you were talking about. My answer was, we had our own tagmat asfalites as well during the 1940s. So, I'm not sure we should be. I think we're in that case, we're in a glass house and shouldn't be throwing stones at some Ukrainians. Yeah, sure, the Ukrainians had pro-Nazis and anti-Semites. So did we. The Cyprus issue, I don't think the Cyprus issue is directly connected to the Ukraine. I am personally very grateful for the resistance that the Ukrainians showed to Russia, because in many ways, the way that Vladimir Putin wants to revise history, I think President Erdogan is trying to revise history and revise borders. And I am gratified when a smaller country can resist a stronger country. It's shown the world that that can happen. I'm gratified that the West is helping the Ukraine, because ultimately what I care about is Greece. And if we are facing this very strong enemy, I think we look towards Zelensky as an example of what we can do and the potential we have to defend our borders as well.
Thank you. I don't see another question. Until somebody else puts another question, let me ask a question myself. You mentioned the Averov family that was coming from the region, but in Greece, the impression is that the Averov family has something with the Vlachs. Is there any connection with that between those two? And Vlachs, do they live also in Albania and so on? Could you elaborate on this?
Yes, so the Averovs originally are from Metsovo.
Yeah.
And there's a branch of the family that goes to Russia and comes back. And then from Metsovo, others go down to Alexandria. So it's one of these families that is spread out, but eventually the main figure of Averov, the Rally brothers are a big family, they spread out everywhere. The Averovs are a smaller family, and eventually from Russia, they go back to Metsovo and go down to Alexandria, where Georgios Averov makes his fortune, makes the donation for the battleship. They are Vlachs. They are Hellenized. They're Hellenized Vlachs. I'm reminded that there was someone who was served as president of the AHEPA, and he contacted me and said, "Oh, Alexander, I've just found out from my roots. I've got Vlach roots. Does that mean I'm not Greek?" And the answer is, of course you're Greek. The way we have ethnic groups in America, and all the ethnic groups become part of America, the Vlachs especially are a particular ethnic group, and the other way to call them is Aromanians. The huge percentage of Vlachs has a Greek identity. There is no Vlach national identity. Some have it, but the majority embrace Greek identity. So the Vlach origins are not incompatible with Greekness. Not only that, but there's a number of Vlach huge philanthropic contributions. There's no greater patriot than Georgios Averov.
Okay. So, Stefanos, do you see any questions from Facebook?
No.
Okay, then let me put another question. From whom the Ottomans took the north shores of Pontus? Because it seems to me from what you said, the Russians, they did not have a presence there. And then they came down.
Yes, they came down because there was a period of the history tells us that there were Tatars, there were military bands, there was a lawlessness in the area, and it wasn't developed at all. And the Ottomans controlled it. That's why we know that Odessa was Hadzi Bey, but the Ottomans never developed the area. They just had it it was a military buffer against the Russians, which they eventually lost as they were gradually losing ground to the Ottomans. And the first big losing of the ground is when they have to abandon the northern rim of the Black Sea in the late 1700s, and then they start losing battles to the Ottomans continuously for the next century.
And how easy it was to communicate the invitation of Catherine the Great to the Greeks occupied by the Ottomans? And did the Ottomans allow the Greeks to leave and go to Russia? How it was at the time?
Yes. So Catherine the Great has got her representatives in throughout the Ottoman Empire and in Europe as well. So this becomes known, especially through the churches and other means. There is a kind of network of information. The Ottomans were not particularly efficient in controlling migration, nor did they care, nor were they able to, you know, if the Ottomans kind of knew that this outflow of people would actually create a commercial center which would make Russia more strong and then threaten them, then they would have been able to. But you know, when we talk about the Ottoman Empire, we are talking about a patchwork of local authorities, no real coordination. So it was very easy for the Greeks to move in and out of the Ottoman areas.
I have also read from another book that there were caravans of Greeks, from northern Greeks, that they were going up with horses and mules and so on, moving goods and coming back and forth and so on. Could you elaborate on that? How
Yes,
it was happening at the time?
And that the Ottomans favored, because the Greeks were the traders who were bringing in goods and exporting goods, and the Ottomans were taxing them. So for them, it was an advantageous thing. And the Greeks have these commercial routes. One goes from northern Greece up through the Danube and into Central Europe, and the other one goes up to Romania. And before they get to Russia, there's the Danube Delta, which comes out into the Black Sea, which is a point in which it's an area which the Greeks control. So the Greek trading caravans, we've got continuous routes. There's some lovely maps of the Balkans full of lines, and you're saying, you know, what's going on here? They're not exactly roads; they are dirt tracks, but a cart can move, and that's the commerce that's taking place.
Yeah.
And it's Greeks, well, Greeks, Armenians, and Jews, but the Armenians are on the eastern side of the empire. The Jews are mostly on the ports. All this traffic in the Balkans up to Russia and up to Central Europe through the Danube is Greek.
Okay, so let me go to some new questions. This comes from Tassos Chichis. Thank you for a great analysis of these historical facts. Please address, if possible, what were the underlying reasons that made Catherine the Great to abandon the Greeks, whom she induced to revolt in order to create a southern front to the Turks, although in the end she negotiated the Russian flag on all and Greek shipping that did help the Greek shipping?
Yes, it helped. So, three things with Catherine the Great. First of all, you might have heard there's something called the Greek project. The Greek project was the first idea from the 1760s, I think 1770s, which was this idea that her son Constantine that the Russians would take over Constantinople, and her son Constantine would become the emperor of the Ottoman Empire, and in a sense Russia would you know, a bit like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Russia would take over what was the Byzantine Empire. That was the other great powers of Europe were in no way sympathetic of that, and that went nowhere. That was her first idea. Then the second idea is the Orlov rebellion, which, as we know, they abandoned the Greeks in Peloponnesus, and the Turks, all the reprisals were suffered by the Greeks because the Russians, who went down in 1770 to Peloponnesus to tell the Greeks to do an uprising against the Ottomans, left. But in the 1770s, because the Russians have defeated the Ottomans, we have this treaty of Küçük Kaynarca. Kaynarca is a village in, I think it's in Western Thrace. Küçük, as you know, is small. It's to Mikro Kaynarca, I think it was in Greek. And that's very important because the Turks, the Ottomans are obliged to allow vessels flying the Russian flag to go from the Black Sea down into the Dardanelles and into the Mediterranean. And that, of course, enables the Greek maritime fleet to use the Russian flag to conduct commerce in the Mediterranean and be protected by the laws, because they have the Russian support and the Russian flag, and that's very important for Greek maritime trade. Now, Catherine the Great, the Greeks talk about το ξανθό γένος, our Orthodox brothers, το αγέρι που θα φυσήξει από το βορειά was a later version. All those things, the wind that's going to blow from the north. I mean, I know there's an Orthodox affinity, and I have a huge respect for that. But Catherine the Great was in favor of Catherine the Great, not the Greeks and not the Orthodox. And I just think the Greeks benefited because the enemy of our enemy, those type of arguments. In other words, the Russians, the Ottomans were the
common enemy.
Were the enemies of the Russians. The Russians were defeating them. The Russians wanted a presence in the Eastern Mediterranean, and we benefited. But we benefited indirectly, I think, not directly in many ways.
The next question is again from Kostas Delagiorgas. Did any Greeks go to Ukraine after the Greek Civil War?
Yes, that's a complicated story, but we do have the political refugees, the people of the left who flee, go over into across the border of Albania and Bulgaria and seek refuge with those governments, and then the Soviet Union takes over. But mostly the Soviet Union settles the Greeks not in those southern areas. They settle them mostly in Central Asia, in Tashkent. That's where the majority. I think that was where the headquarters of the Communist Party of Greece was. But there is, and of course, so there is a Greek presence of political refugees. Not so much in the Black Sea areas, but further east in Russia, and that's another page in the history of the Greek diaspora, and they themselves in many ways preserve their identity, and this question reminds me of one more name, which is Vlasis Agdzidis.
Yes.
Agdzidis is a Greek historian, Pontian historian, and he's written about these communities. He's fire and brimstone against the Bolsheviks. He doesn't like them at all, and he doesn't like what the Soviet communists do to the Greeks. But he provides a lot of information about that particular page. So yes. Another aspect of the Greek presence in Russia.
I don't see again another question. You mentioned that Stalin, he considered many of the Greeks of the area as traitors, and then he expelled them to Siberia and so on and so on. Why this happened? Had this anything to do with Venizelos sending troops there?
Yes, I did mention.
So
yes, that was the old. That was the brief Ukraine expedition that Greece engaged in when the Bolsheviks were fighting the White Russians. But that wasn't that was important and didn't make the life of the Greeks easier momentarily there, but they were able to adapt. No, you know, with Stalin in the 1920s, when they give these autonomous area, you know, they give this slight autonomy to the Greeks in southern Ukraine, Donetsk and Mariupol, Stalin is the commissar of nationalities. He's approved that. But then in the 1930s, Stalin is engaged in these inter-party struggles. He's against he's against Bukharin, he's against Trotsky, and the Greeks are considered, they're considered political enemies. It's ideological. They're considered either pro this or pro that. It's a peculiar way of figuring things out, but it's basically you know, a sense of political paranoia that targets certain groups, labels them with the wrong ideological color, and then eliminates them or deports them at least.
Since I don't see any other question, let me ask my final question. It's a little bit peripheral, but you may know something, putting more light into it. This summer I was in Dimitsana, which is up in the mountains. And this was a prospering place during the Ottoman Empire. And you read there that they were involved in trade and so on, that's how they made their money. And I'm wondering what kind of trade the people of Dimitsana in a very poor mountainous area were involved in that made them rich.
So that's a good question, and I'm not sure I know the answer, but I have wondered about the same thing, because to a certain extent, and this sounds very strange to people, the dried fruit, the currants, which the current crisis caused the emigration to America, but the dried fruits, the currants, were very important for the diets in Western Europe. And dried figs and currants. We hear about Smyrna exporting dried figs, and I'm saying, come on, who is consuming so many dried figs that Smyrna is making money out of them? How can the Peloponnesus can make money out of exporting? I mean, they're grapes, for heaven's sakes, dried grapes, currants, and yet they were a very big part of the diet, because I think the currants and the whole range of dried fruits that Peloponnesus produced were important for, especially in Britain, for puddings and the other things that were very important for the British, and they had no other access to these sources. So Greece was exporting the dry fruits. So I suspect that the Dimitsana might have been the same. It's part of this is in Arcadia, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. It's these dried fruits. It's really quite difficult for us to conceive. I remember I went once, when I was talking about Greek emigration, I went to a supermarket. I was trying to find the currants so I said, yes, stafida, πού είναι η stafida? And then I got a bag, and I showed this bag to the class, and I said, believe it or not, this was a made export. And when the phylloxera hit this in Peloponnesus, it created the emigration. Difficult to kind of conceive.
Yeah, Dimitsana is an amazing place, because there were, it seems, many rich people there, and played a very pivotal role to the revolution too.
Yes, exactly. And there's wealth, and aside from the currants, it's also, you know, chestnuts, which were used to dye leather. You know, it's these.
I see. Yeah, you are right. Yes, because there is a museum in Dimitsana on this, on the leathers, to dye, how they were dyeing the leathers.
And so it's huge, because you've got a monopoly, because you've got you're growing chestnuts because chestnuts, of course, need a particular altitude in Greece.
Sure. Very good. Thank you very, very much. Stefanos, is any